I also have an AA Dipple. The year 1989, I guess. I entered 5th year. 70 of us entered 5th year. 5 of us got our diplomas. Now, I don't know if the school has changed since I left, but at the time I was there, happily that was an exceptional year, but the pass rate, which is to say the number of students who started in 1st year and finished 5th year in 5 years, was 18%. Most of my classmates, most of us, even our tutors who studied there, we generally put at least 5 years behind us before we ever set foot in a place again, because it was such horrific work. On the other hand, it was very much a place which enshrined the Protestant Calvinist worldview that all of your virtues were not going to get you anywhere, but all of your sins were counted against you. And it didn't matter how many crits you had that were positive, you ended up at the end of the year, and you didn't know if you were going to have to do another term, if you're going to have to resubmit your portfolio. You just didn't know. So we all lived in everlasting terror of failure, which is a style of management I don't actually believe in. Alvin Boyarsky, who was chairman until he died actually the year after I got my diploma. I think I was one of the last diplomas with his signature on it. He sort of was a gardener that believed if you jumped on everything and stuck its head above the ground, then the really tough plants would make it, and he was right. I think we lost a lot of delicate plants along the way, which I think is a pity, and if we today go into management theory, I would probably not be espousing the theory of Boyarsky. But that was 30 years ago, so maybe, is Boyson still, who's the chairman?
Brett Steele.
Okay, true. I think you were well prepared to go out and tilt at windmills or slay dragons, so in whatever fields that you wanted to. So that's sort of a bit where I start. So you represent a generation that's 30 years after I started, at a school that I still, as I say, I'm not going to diss in any way. It was a tough school, but a great school. Zaha Hadid celebrated her birthday on the roof of my studio. She was by that time one of the tutors. She was in a diploma unit, not mine. But it was a very rich environment. We were there with Dan Liebeskind, with Kohlhaas, Zaha, Peter Wilson. My side was the cybernetic side. So John Fraser, Raoul Bunschkotten. We had, of course, Cedric Price, who I worked for. I actually ended up working for, is one of, I think, still, in my opinion, one of the great 20th century English architects in terms of his invention, in terms of his impact on architecture. I don't think you could write a history of English architecture in the 20th century without having Cedric there, even though he only built about 3 things. He was one of the most influential architects around. And he could walk into a room, which he would at 10 in the morning, with a snifter full of brandy. And he'd take in this many drawings that some poor student had plastered on the wall. And he'd just look at them, and after about 10 minutes he'd say, but that entrance and that elevation don't seem to match. He had a capacity for understanding plan section elevation and an architectural argument that I've never seen equal. Anyway, so that's a bit of my background. So instead of my usual rap, I mean, you can imagine I see a lot of people and I have to talk a lot about what's going on here. And I can talk about even what I did before I came here. But what I'd like to do instead is understand what you want to get out of today, what you're interested in, why you're here, in a sense. Because it's not going to be a talk that's inclined vertically. I'm quite prepared to treat you as nascent colleagues. So tell me what you want out of this meeting. What do you want to see, learn, think? What has made you curious? Why did your tutors, and Sue, you are in there with, are you the tutors, or are you working in a unit with some big name? You're it. Okay, so there's some excellent research that has been sort of taking that popular mythology that more people are going to museums. Well, the same people are going to more museums is true. we build museums like they're going out of style, and the same people go to them. So you build 10 new museums, and the same person goes there. 10 times more visitors in 2015 go to museums. We're all very proud, and of course in the business we have to say these things because the government likes that, and the government thinks we're making more money. And it's very good to say those things, but it's actually, I think, masking an underlying problem, which is museums in the past decades have not been able to create a compelling vision of why a museum matters in a contemporary life. Okay. I realize that if I am not careful, I'm going to speak for an hour and a half and you won't get to see anything. So I better cut. So that's the 5 fingers, okay? That's the 5 fingers. I will cut short that discourse, but you'll see upstairs how we're responding to it. I want to pass to a related topic, which is about why we have museums. And another quote from another 1980s American philosopher. I'm Canadian, and I'm, if anything, anti-American, and certainly in the current election situation, absolutely white with terror about what my cousins to the south of the Canadian border do. However, I have to give credit where credit is due. In the same generation as Sandburg, Alfred Barr, who's older, by the way, by a bit. Oh, maybe he's not. I just did that. Sorry, I was just doing a list of the. I'm writing currently about major figures in the 60s who shaped museum thinking. And of course, Sandburg is there, and as is Barr. But among them is also Nelson Goodman, who's a philosopher, who said a museum is an institution for the prevention of blindness. We do this by making works work. And works work when they contribute to visual intelligence, heighten enhanced curiosity, and contribute to the making and the remaking of our worlds. Now this is effectively a very 60s approach. It's to say that the museum is an activist institution that is about who we are as people. It's actually part of our identity program. And in a sense, this is a mission that was very much shared by another person who, if you've not heard of, is not a problem, but you really should know about it, and his name is Franco Russoli. Franco Russoli was one of the great Italian museum thinkers. He was the curator of the first Picasso exhibition in Italy, 1953, at the Palazzo Reale in Milan, and he was actually director of the Brera until 1977, on the eve of opening a laboratory by Bruno Munari, which was one of the great educational innovators in museums. He dropped dead of a heart attack at 54 years old. Okay? Franco Russoli was of this generation, and Franco Russoli believed deeply in the activist mission of the museum. He believed that a museum was a place where you didn't just go to pass the time. You didn't just go to while away a bored Saturday afternoon when you could have been playing baseball if it had been sunny. This was a place where he called it was a place of engagement, not of merely distraction. He believed in the museum as part of who we are. This mission, which I very much share, because I'm an old man as well. I am a younger, one of the last part of the 60s generation, so I very much am part of that generation which was shaped by Franco Russoli, by Sandburg, by Alfred Barr, by Marshall McLuhan, by Cedric Price. We're talking a strong socially activist generation that had come out of the fat years of the baby boom. Their parents had lived through the war, their parents had rebuilt Europe and America, economic success, and we had the war in Vietnam, we had we had increasing liberalization, we had increasing the fight against racism in America, etc., etc. We know what the 60s are. I belong in a small way in that generation. So the project here is very much in the same way, very much indebted to Franco Russoli. So when I talk about the museum, I ask people to imagine themselves in the context of the immigration debate. I also have a British passport, so we just went through a very embarrassing period in which the debate about immigration gave us the Brexit, which I think is a travesty of democracy. It is the democracy of a lynch mob, not the democracy of a civilized country. However, the immigration debate is very interesting because, in fact, you have to realize that we're all immigrants. And I don't mean that in the sense of geographically immigrants, which some of us may be. I was born in Canada. my family hadn't left England for 800 years. I mean, I can go back to family to 1207, but that's not the immigration we're talking about. We are all immigrants in time. And we're all moving forward into a future that we really don't have a good sense of. So when I started thinking about immigration in time, which is very much part of why the museum is important, in my opinion, and again, you have to understand, nothing I'm telling you is true, okay? Nothing I'm telling, I don't want any of you to think that what I'm saying has anything of the absolute truth in it. It is the fruit of 30 years of struggling with certain issues, to which I have found certain provisional answers of my own, which I'm sharing with you. Do not mistake them for some sort of, you will find your own truths. These are mine, okay? Just to be careful. So to return to the idea of immigration, it reminded me when I was director of Richard Meyer's first museum in Frankfurt, which is the Museum for Applied Arts, which at the time I became director in 1999, had followed the normal curve of all of our new museums, because museum architects, unfortunately, have a lot to basically excuse themselves for, because architecture creates this S-curve. Everybody goes to see the building. So for the first 3 years, Frankfurt in 1985 to 1989 had 300,000, 400,000 visitors a year. I get there in 1999, we were down to about 60,000 a year, because of course the collection was still the collection. They hadn't really done anything, it was just the big white box everybody'd seen. Which itself is a whole other story I can tell you about going to New York, meeting Richard Meyer. We redesigned the museum together, ripped out 30% of his original installation, and relaunched it. But what I can say is we relaunched it as Europe's first wireless museum. We had Europe's first collection of digital applied arts. We did the world's first exhibition of computer viruses as a form of concrete literature. So to repropose the museum is part of what I've been struggling with most of my life. But why was I saying that? Was because of immigration. Because in Frankfurt there are a lot of immigrants. About just under 30% of the population is Turkish. And so we had, well, the first thing in the museum we found is we didn't have very many Turkish visitors, which wasn't a big surprise because we closed at 5 o'clock. And of course, the Turkish community were working, they were taxi drivers, they were working in shops, they couldn't come to the museum. And the second thing is all the museum's interpretation was in German, in small letters, which not even the Germans wanted to come read, right? So one of the first things we did is relabeled the entire museum in English, German, in our Islamic collection, in Turkish, in Arabic, in our Asian collection, in Chinese and in Japanese, as well as English and German. And we opened the museum till 8 o'clock every night. In 1 year, we went from 5,000 to 35,000 Turkish visitors. We also invited all the taxi drivers in the city to a Sunday brunch twice a year for their families so they could see the collections. They're all Turkish. But the reason I'm saying that is because getting to know the Turkish population and doing projects with them, you realize that the parents had come to Germany in the 50s as Gastarbeiter, which is a very difficult situation. They came, they weren't given citizenship, they might live there, have kids there, grandkids, but they still don't have passports. But when they came with 2 suitcases, right? They were leaving their country to go to Germany for the rest of their lives, maybe for 5 years, maybe for 10 years. They were leaving everything and they had to pack their bags. And we did a project where we asked grandchildren to interview their grandparents about what they put in their suitcase. Because when you're packing to go away for a long time, you can't put everything in your suitcase. You only put a few things in your suitcase. But they're very special. And they don't have to be valuable. It wasn't putting wads of dollars, it was things that mattered to you. Things that were about who you were, what you believed, who you played with when you were a kid. They were about who you were. If you think that we are immigrants in time and we have to pack 2 bags to go to the future, where do we pack our bags? One of the last places left to pack our bags is the museum, because it's a summation in some ways. It is not the exclusive place for packing our bags, but one of the places we pack our bags for the future, for a very uncertain future, and take with us things that make us who we are, is in a museum. It's where we have stuff that has value to us, had value to our parents. It was where my grandfather told me for the first time that spiders were beautiful. I remember the Science Museum. I went there with my granddad, and I used to be frightened of spiders. He showed me how beautiful they were. Those things you carry with you for your lifetime. That's why museums, in my humble opinion, exist. So, as we say in Italian, da prescindere, without taking into account all the other wonderful things museums do. And we can talk about them, we can talk about curation, we can talk about lots of stuff. But in my opinion, and certainly in the work that I'm doing here and have done in every institution, which I've had the privilege of having a senior position in at least 4 times, transforming an institution, it's been in the service of this kind of identity project. I believe in these places fundamentally as part of our construction of who we are. And secondarily, and I'll finish with this third theme and then we'll go, well, stop talking and boring and you can go up and look at the stuff. The second thing that we're very special, first of all, we're part of packing our bags. And the second thing we're part of is learning for the sheer pleasure of learning. Because learning is an undervalued pleasure. And I say pleasure for a very specific reason. Okay? Aristotle, as far back as Aristotle, probably before Aristotle, but certainly Aristotle wrote about the human needs, which have become, of course, genetically consecrated. We have to eat, we have to drink, we have to reproduce ourselves, and we have to learn. Aristotle was very clear that learning was one of the 4 human characteristics. Now, genetic evolution, or evolutionary genetics, is very clear about why this is so. And in fact, it's very clear why we are essentially a creature that evolves, succeeding better and better in securing the successful reproduction of our offspring. This is what we do as creatures. Put aside philosophy, put aside writing books, put aside singing songs. Fundamentally, we are creatures that are genetically adapting to environments in order to do the reproduction bit a little better. Now, Alison Gopnik, who's a child psychologist, for instance, very good. If you read The New Yorker, do any of you read The New Yorker? Doesn't anybody read The New Yorker anymore? Okay. Adam, the brother, 3 children of a brilliant neurophysiologist, an American who went to Canada, had 3 children in Canada, they're all Canadians. Blake Gopnik, who is an art critic, who you might read in our Tribune. Adam Gopnik is the editor-in-chief of The New Yorker, and Alison Gopnik is arguably one of the world's leading child psychologists. And she once wrote, she said, you know, there's a common misconception about orgasms. We generally think we have sex to have orgasms. This is backwards. In evolutionary terms, this is actually a misunderstanding. We actually have orgasms in order to have sex. Because the creatures for whom it was not pleasant to reproduce didn't reproduce. They disappeared over the course of time. The same is true with learning. The creatures for whom learning is not a pleasure, however abstract, a real pleasure, that aha, that curiosity, all the pleasures of learning, the creatures who were not curious about what was making that noise in the bush don't survive. They don't pass on their genes. Only the creatures that actually have a pleasure associated with a necessity go forward in the evolutionary chain. Turning back to my argument, a museum is a place where we try to create an environment where we reappropriate the pleasures of learning without the extrinsic goals of getting jobs, making money, even finding girlfriends, whatever. We want the pleasure of learning. The museum is a privileged site for learning, for the sheer hell of it, the sheer joy of it. And when we do our work correctly, and I'm saying most museums fail miserably. Most museums are dead boring. When they try to be educational, they get it all wrong. They think that learning is, actually the learning is the point. It's not. It's often the way you get to the learning that's the point. Actually, I go back to my earlier metaphor, probably it's productively. It's the process that actually is the fun, not the end result. So a quiz that says, oh, do you know that, isn't actually that much fun. But a murder mystery is actually kind of cool. And if we think of the things that people do and the amount of intellectual work they do for pleasure, we have to understand the importance of creating environments where we can derive that pleasure. Think of what learning people do for pleasure anyway. They play chess games, they read murder mysteries, they do crossword. There's an enormous amount of productive. In fact, now on the tube, all I see is people playing games. Now, you could argue that the quality of the learning in those games is fairly minimal, which it often is. But that's just bad game design. The point is, we don't just sit there like zombies. We want our brains to be engaged. So the final goal reason I would say we have museums is as a privileged site for informal learning. Informal learning is all learning, and this is a cybernetic definition, is all learning for which there is no condition other than the desire to participate. Formal systems, like the AA, for instance, any formal system, of course, you have to show a portfolio, you have to be interviewed, you have to define yourself, you have to predefine. And of course, for you to get your diplomas, you're going to have to go through another passage, right? That's formal education. Not because it's interactive, non-interactive, boring, not boring. It's not about style. Formality and informality are not stylistic. They are systems requirements. In a museum, it's informal. Why? Because nobody ever failed a museum. It's a quote by Frank Oppenheimer, the founder of the Exploratorium in San Francisco. Nobody ever failed a museum. What does that mean? That means that when you buy your ticket, nobody's going to say, look, before we give you a ticket, I'd like to know, actually, there are 5 questions here. And we'd like you to say, if you know, do you actually understand what the iconography is behind San Sebastian? We have a lot of San Sebastians. If you don't understand it, you should really go home and study. We don't do that, do we? Nor do we give you a test at the end. We don't stop you at the end and say, look, you probably had a good time, but we'd like to really know, because if you're going to come back. So conditions in and out are not features of an informal system. A museum is a privileged site for informal learning. A museum is the site, one of the most potent sites of creating our identity as time travelers in an uncertain future. And indeed, a museum is an institution for the prevention of blindness. It helps us open our eyes to see things that maybe we've looked at all of our lives and haven't really seen very well. And that's where all the other functions, the 5 fingers, all subsume. They're all there because we're that kind of institution. So why do we study these things? Well, to help that. Why do we interpret? Well, we want to be an institution for preventing blindness. Everything we do ultimately serves. Why do we collect and preserve? Because it's part of our identity project. Our identity is part of what we carry with us. Everything we do in a museum, all the 5 fingers, serve those 3, in my humble opinion, in those 3 different functions of the museum. Okay? Now, that's probably way too much. Too much, what is that, TMI? Too much information? Okay, too much information. However, what I suggest we do is I will go upstairs, we'll all go up together. I will do a little rap just about how the museum is working, a bit of what we've done in the last year or so with the team. And I have to say clearly that nobody does a museum by themselves. Team is not just a politically correct metaphor. This sort of stuff doesn't happen unless people see themselves as part of this. And I think that the reason you try to develop metaphors, you try to develop ways of speaking, is that people start to say, I can do that. I can be part of that. And what you're going to see upstairs, I think, will show that between January 21st this year and actually next Wednesday on the 10th, we will have reinstalled over 1/3 of the collection. We've redone a whole bunch of stuff. And there's something happening, and that's because there's a team that kind of wants to be part of this new kind of museum, not just a museum, which traditionally in Italy, a museum has been a place where you took care of the stuff. This museum, when I came here, well, I won't tell you that. We'll go upstairs, and I'll do a little exercise with you, okay? Not a real exercise, it's not like school. I just want you we go upstairs. Well, no, okay. Stop. I'm going to tell you the story here because you're sitting down and it's fine. Okay, we're going to go upstairs. We just put the front door back where the front door should be after 113 years of entering in the corner. You will see new information desk. We'll go into a long corridor that used to be a display space, but which we actually transformed along with Front Design, who's the glass designers for Rem Koolhaas and everybody else, with a sliding glass door to create climate conditions that allow us to use the front door, which hadn't been used, which I'll tell you about when I get there. I want you to walk down with me that corridor. You'll see a bunch of stuff. You'll see some text on the wall. You'll see a sort of user guide to the museum. But the little thing I want you to do for me is don't look left. Don't look to your left. Promise me you won't look to, only, even though it's a really boring wall, you'll turn back and then you'll go see the whole, you won't miss anything. But just for the purposes of me telling you before and after, I want you to keep your eyes focused on, as you walk down, on the right-hand wall, however boring that may be, until I say, okay? Good, let's go. And to put beside the Raphael, the Perugino. Perugino was Raphael's master and painted the same scene, mirror reversed, and they've never been together ever. And the Perugino was stolen by Napoleon, taken to France for 200 years, never came back to Italy. We brought them back. Mantegna, the Dead Christ, we put together in a dialogue with Annabella Carracci and an Orazio Borgiani, both inspired by this radical, contemporary idea that you could take a living dead body, a real dead body, and portray it from a frontal perspective, from the feet up. This was radical. Mantegna was doing something that had never been done before. Here is going to be a dialogue that is called A Question of Attribution, after the Alan Bennett play, in which we have a real Caravaggio, ours, an attributed copy of a lost Caravaggio, the Caravaggio that is being claimed by some but not all experts to be the original, but could also be another copy, a signed copy of a Caravaggio, Madeleine, a copy of the Madeleine that we don't know who did it, but it's a copy, declared copy, it's one of 8 known copies of the same lost original, and only one art historian thinks that she's found the original, nobody actually agrees with it. And a super painting by the guy who did this and maybe did the other, because one of the arguments about whether or not the Caravaggio that is attributed but nobody knows for sure, one of the arguments is that, well, it might be just another copy by the same artist. If this is true, you've got to show the best work and see if it can match the one over there. This is a place where we're inviting the experts of the world at the end of January. Every expert in Caravaggio is going to come here with the doors closed and duke it out. Because there is no consensus. There are very credible experts who believe that this could be really the real thing. There are others that say there's no way, it's just a really good copy, but none of them, not one, has ever seen the two paintings together. Not one human being on the planet, up to this point, has seen these two paintings together. This is the first time this painting is going to be shown in public. It ignited a huge debate over whether or not a public museum should have the effrontery to show a privately owned painting, despite the fact that it's been frozen by the French state for 3 years in order that they want to buy it, if it's a Caravaggio. And it's also the list price has been already announced, so we're not going to make it worth any more than it's been already put for sale on. The sale price is it's 120 million if it's a Caravaggio. So who is risking something? The poor owner, who I think has got to be one of the most courageous people, he's putting, or she, I've never met the owner, that Caravaggio, if all the experts get together and say, whoop, no way, they lose. Nobody, so I deeply believe that one of the missions of a real, living, alive museum is to create the possibility to create new knowledge by doing something that an individual expert can't do. They'd have to look at a photograph, compare it to the real thing, compare the photographs. So we're bringing the real paintings here. That's something that we can do. We're not saying it's a Caravaggio. In fact, we're falling over backwards to say it's not a museum's job, ever, by the way. When a painting is loaned, it's not up to the museum to say it's not what it says it is. If I lend a painting, and we have lots of paintings here, which I'm not convinced of the attribution. Nobody is. We have a Rembrandt that is a Rembrandt if I'm Rembrandt. But if we lend it to the Rijksmuseum, I will not let them change the attribution. If they want my painting, it's what I say it is, or what we say it is. The same is true with any loan. It is not the museum's job to give the attribution. Experts make attributions and they fight it out, and they do it like science. They publish, they counter-publish, they jump up and down, they make arguments, and at some point the dust settles and we say, this, on the weight of the evidence, is probably a this. Could be a Caravaggio, maybe it's not, maybe it's a Finson, maybe, who knows, maybe it's someone we never heard of. There's Berenson, in fact, when he first saw Filippo Lippi, famously, didn't know who it was by. And so he said, follower of Botticelli. He sort of thought it was somebody, the painter of the wriggling child, the Bambino del Vespo. And it was only much later that we realized this was another artist working. That's how it happens. And it doesn't happen by everybody getting all shy about things and saying museums shouldn't do that. So we're taking a very, I think, courageous stand, which we are going to hope doesn't cost me my job, because it runs against a public sector culture that is very anti-private sector just by definition. It's just one of those, it's an ideological conflict. Anyway, so here will be 5 paintings. 2 Judith and Holofernes, 1 attributed to Finson, 1 attributed to Caravaggio. Here will be a real Finson, a copy, and another Finson. And then our Caravaggio, which, by the way, we have documentary evidence is really Caravaggio. There's no way it's not a Caravaggio. We know, we've been able to follow it from the time it was painted. We know where it was painted. So the only one that is real is that. All the rest, and the real Finson signed, the real Finson signed, the real Finsons. And let's see the cards fall where they may. Okay, come on. With things kept in. In fact, external storage, we have probably 1,500 works in external storage. One of the places, for instance, you can go visit is called the Galleria dell'Arte Moderna. They're all our paintings. Now for us, in our list, that's a deposito esterno, but it's actually a public museum. So you have to realize that paintings are, if you go to the Science Museum, an entire Luini fresco cycle is in the Science Museum. If you go to the mayor's office, you can go throughout Lombardy and you will find our paintings in external deposit. And it doesn't mean they're not visible, it doesn't mean they're not shown to the public, it just means they're not in the museum. We do have a relatively small number of paintings that are not accessible to the public. When we're making a new installation, we're slowly thinning out the exhibit. You've seen a lot of the stacking, which I'm trying to thin out a little, because we no longer look at paintings way up high. So this used to have paintings up there. So we're thinning it out. Those are going into storage until we find another way or a better way to show them, because in 2018 we're opening a whole new palazzo for our collection of modern art, which you saw squeezed into that horrible corridor. All that is going over to a new palazzo, which will free up not only that corridor, the 2 rooms you saw. It also will have storage spaces which we can make accessible. We may decide to move the storage over. We'll free up a whole bunch of new space in which we can then put things on display. So there's a sort of urban legend about every museum with its thousands of Leonardos stacked in piles in the wet basement. It's just nonsense. It really is, at least when it comes to this museum, an urban legend. When it comes to a museum like the British Museum, when it comes to certain typologies of museum, a natural history museum, they have millions of objects and they are stored. But again, they're not the Leonardos. I know of no major museum that is not showing its masterpieces. I mean, no director on earth would do that. So every major museum shows its best works. At the Uffizi, there are some school of Botticellis stuck in the basement. They don't have a lot of space either, and I've borrowed them, in fact. And they put them on tour, they lend them, etc., because that's the other way to get them out and about, is to lend them to other institutions, to put them in play. But the best works are going to be in the museum. I mean, I can't think of a museum, even the Louvre, in which the best works aren't in fact on the wall.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
So when these masterpieces, when they have to be restored, how long does it take, or how long do you usually take to restore them and put them back into place?
Well, restoration is it's how long is a piece of string. I've been involved in restoration projects that have lasted 2-3 years, and there's some restoration which I want to have done by next Monday, because there's some paintings here that are filthy, that because of the lighting, nobody didn't notice until we put new lighting on them. We suddenly see, you can still see on the Ganji, for instance, handprints. This can be restored, i.e. the painting can be cleaned quite readily without damaging the painting very quickly. I hope it's done by next week. So there's a wide range of what constitutes a restoration, and also the cost. Restoration can cost hundreds of thousands of euros. Restoration can cost 2 or 3.
I'm guessing museums do like piece by piece, not like...
Very few museums I know do complete restoration campaigns of a whole section. It would be too... It would not be the way a director would use the money, probably, unless you had a particular. If you're in America and a sponsor comes and says, "I want to restore your collection of Titians," well, you might say yes, but it's not something that happens often. And restoration is something you tend to do opportunistically. You keep the pieces you can as best as you can. When a sponsor comes along and says, "I really don't know what to do with my money," you say, "Well, you could restore a painting." So, it's the sort of thing that we try to offer to them.
Thank you.
What is the new building that you're mentioning?
It's called the